Megamind at its core is a deconstruction of the superhero genre, and pretty much every character in it is a reflection of that. Megamind is a villain who isn't actually evil and sees being the bad guy as more of a job or game where he gets to play the part nobody else wants. Metroman is a hero who isn't all that virtuous, and we later find out just wants to live a normal life. Roxanne is a damsel in distress who isn't afraid of the villain in the slightest, and goes out of her way to try and stop the threats to her city at every turn. And, of course, Hal Stewart is a superhero prodigy that decides it's more fulfilling to be a villain. Really. The only major character who even halfway plays his role straight is Minion, and even then, while more polite like a typical villain sidekick, he tries to keep Megamind from going straight rather than being a good influence on him. As I said in another video, which you can find a link in the description to, the inverted morality play on display in this movie is really impressive, and some don't give it due credit. But one thing this movie doesn't actually deconstruct about the superhero genre regarding characters is the dynamic between the eventual hero and villain. Because as I've talked about in many other videos, Titan is a dark reflection of Megamind and the type of villain he could have become had he truly succumbed to his darker nature and not simply played the role of a bad guy. But in order for him to be an accurate reflection of Megamind, it must be pointed out that in a few ways, the two weren't actually all that different. And since I've dedicated quite a few videos to stressing how different Titan and Megamind really were, today I'd like to do the opposite and go over the ways they weren't so different. And here's your spoiler alert. Don't continue if you haven't seen Megamind. Okay, so as I just noted, if two characters are to serve as a reflection of each other, it's basically a given that they're going to be similar in certain ways. Because if the two have and never did have anything in common, then how can they possibly demonstrate what the other might have become? For two characters to be symbolically linked, they have to at least have one critical thing in common. And though it may not seem like it at first, Hal and Megamind do actually share quite a few traits overall. Because for one thing, neither of them are attractive in the traditional sense. Sure, maybe Megamind is handsome when all's said and done, but he's still a blue alien with a giant head. To put it as gently as possible, he wouldn't be most people's first pick to go to prom with. In fact, his looks might have been his biggest obstacle at school, because, in addition to having superpowers, of course, Metroman actually looked like a human being. He looks like he belongs in the classroom. But Megamind, by contrast, looks like an alien freak, and that's exactly how he's treated, even if he doesn't deserve it. And in the same vein, Hal is clearly modeled after the typical geek look, so as a result, he's not all that physically attractive. Though to say he's ugly might be a bit of a stretch, but, at least until he gets superpowers, he's certainly no beauty either. And that's not even getting into the fact that he's clearly not interested in his health. And honestly, even that, how they look, is an excellent example of how the two are a reflection of each other. Because while Megamind may be weird looking, he is still a handsome guy, similar to how he was always a good person at heart, even if others felt otherwise. While by contrast, Hal is naturally plain and lets himself grow a huge gut, and only becomes attractive by getting artificially injected with superpowers, which can easily be seen as a metaphor for the fact that his wanting to be a superhero is fake or engineered to get Roxanne, and that his real self is susceptible to the corruption that ends up rotting him to his core. To put it simply, the physical appearance of the two characters perfectly reflects who they are on the inside, and the fact that neither of them are conventionally attractive perfectly demonstrates how they don't have a normal sense of morality, at least initially. But that also ties into another thing they have in common, which is that they are both societal outcasts. They both lack friends and have trouble forming relationships with people. Heck, this might even be part of the reason why Megamind thought Hal would be perfect for the role of a hero, because he wasn't your average member of society and seemed actively rejected by it, just how Megamind himself was. But that being said, while it's known why Megamind was rejected by society, and that he never really had any say in the matter, with Hal it seems to be a lot more self-inflicted. As in, he doesn't seem too interested in having friends, acts unpleasant to pretty much everybody, and even when he does want somebody's attention, he behaves like a total creep instead of putting in the effort to make that person feel comfortable around him. To put it simply, while it's easy to understand why both characters would be societal outcasts, the reasons for it are completely different. Again, Megamind could have realized his potential a lot sooner if he had just been given a chance, while Hal mostly did it to himself, and moreover doesn't seem to care all that much what anybody thinks of him. But that still doesn't change the fact that both characters were ultimately rejected by society at large, and that it did have some kind of negative effect on them. But for perhaps the most interesting similarity between Megamind and Hal, there's also the fact that they were the only two people in all of Metro City who didn't like Metroman. Now, while in Megamind's case this is extremely understandable, considering he always showed him up, put an end to all of his evil plans, and that he could see him for who he truly was underneath his hero exterior. In fact, one could even argue that, at least early on in his life, Megamind was the only one who Metroman showed his real self to, and was in many ways his first bully. Now as for Hal, I already dedicated a whole video to exploring how he felt about Metroman, which you can also find a link in the description too. So all I'll say is that his extreme dislike of the man is incredibly obvious. But unlike Megamind, and as I brought up in the aforementioned video, it's a lot more difficult to determine why Hal felt that way. Though, and this is something I didn't mention, a lot of it could be down to the fact that he believed Roxanne was in love with Metroman and thus was simply jealous of him. But it is also interesting to think that maybe, just like Megamind, Hal could somehow see Metroman for who he really was and knew that all of his superheroics was just an act. I mean, it's unlikely that was the case, given how stupid he is, but it's still interesting to note that of the few things Megamind and Hal had in common, one of them is that they were the only two people that didn't like Metroman, and it's possible in many ways that said dislike was fueled by jealousy in both their cases. Though where they differ in this regard is that Megamind's view on Metroman softens as the movie goes on, and he gets to see that maybe he wasn't such a selfish brat after all, while Hal comes to absolutely despise him after being corrupted by the man's very powers. Though that doesn't stop him from being afraid to take him on one-on-one, in a rare smart move. Okay, so as I said before, while Megamind and Hal may have a few things in common, that still doesn't change the fact that in most regards they are complete opposites of each other. But again, because I dedicated so many videos to discussing those differences, I thought I'd go over a few of the more interesting ways they were similar for a change. As one has to admit, some of the parallels they do have are pretty notable. And in the end, the one thing that makes them really different is Megamind's inner goodness that prevents him from abusing his position as a villain and limiting his misdeeds to petty vandalism, while Hal is ultimately a selfish man who lets himself become a horrible person when presented with the opportunity. So, just like with many other stories of this nature, it's not about how they're the same, but how they're different. Because ultimately, Megamind is a good person and prevails as a result, while Hal isn't and pays the consequences for it. Well, that, and Megamind is a tried and true super genius, while Hal is an unbelievably stupid idiot, but that's a whole other discussion. Alright, I think that pretty much covers everything. So now I'd like to hear what you guys think. Do you believe that Megamind and Hal Stewart have more in common than it would appear at first glance? Or do you still think the two couldn't be any more different? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And as I always say, you do not have to agree with this video if you don't want to. You are entitled to your own opinion, and if you think I was wrong about everything I said, that is absolutely fine. And thank you all for watching. I greatly appreciate all of it, and I hope to see you all next time.